Okay, so for our second question, could you talk to us a little bit about the relationship between power and sexual violence, which is one of your key areas of research?
Yes, I can. So what I talk about with sexual violence is I kind of theorize it as a pivot for the systems of heteropatriarchy and colonial racial capitalism. And what does this mean? It means that sexual violence has functions. It allows capitalist systems to extract reproductive and caring labor for free or at low cost. It supports colonial systems in which populations are racialized and hyper exploited, but also, importantly, protecting women and fighting sexual crime also feeds colonialism and the prison industrial complex, which puts away populations that are deemed surplus to capitalist requirements. So this works at the level of the individual, the household, the community, the nation state, the world, and it operates along what I call 4 vectors. So it's threats, acts, imputations, and punishment of sexual violence. And we have to think all of these together. So acts and threats of sexual violence, which kind of feed into the structural gender binary, keep women in our place, punish people who don't conform to gender norms, and uphold that gender binary, which is the basis of social reproduction in our society. And I think Silvia Federici's work on the witch hunts in early modern Europe has been really useful for me to see how violence against women is really central to the violent imposition of capitalism. And in order for capitalism to work, women have to be controlled. And it wasn't that there wasn't gender inequality in medieval times, of course there was, but women also did have some level of independence, especially working women and older women. And then in the 16th and 17th centuries, hundreds and thousands of women were burned, hanged, and sexually tortured. And the violence in the witch hunt was very much a sexualized violence. There's also evidence that sexual violence wasn't so prevalent in societies in which production did not rely on exploitative gender relations. So Europe before the Neolithic agricultural revolution, for instance, there's some work showing that violence against women comes with more systematized modes of production. And then pre-colonial indigenous societies, and Sarah Deer's work on rape is really important, where she argues that to a large extent, patriarchy and sexual violence was a European import to the Americas. So then we see that acts and threats of sexual violence also support those colonial systems in which land and labor are violently extracted from racialized communities. Sexual violence was a key weapon and still is a key weapon in the colonial arsenal. It's a form of terrorism. It's a mode of ethnic cleansing, either through forced production of children or through preventing women from reproducing due to trauma. And that continues with the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war in various conflicts around the world. And then imputations of and punishment of sexual violence are also really important in the colonial project, which links in with the idea of gender as a political device. So as women's bodies were colonized by sexual violence, men's bodies were colonized by imputations of sexual violence. And Cedric Robinson writes about how colonialism required the notion of the savage, which was based on the idea of sexual threat. And this went through from colonial genocide to slavery to lynching to other forms of neo-colonial violence. The pretext of protecting women, which actually means protecting white women in most cases, was central. And this continues to construct individuals, communities, cultures, nations as dangerous in multiple and interlocking ways. And this goes back to colonial feminism and the role of fighting sexual crime in legitimating and growing that prison industrial complex. So in all these ways, sexual violence is fundamental to racial capitalist divide and rule, really. And that doesn't mean that individual perpetrators of sexual violence are consciously doing this. It's about how those structures reproduce themselves through our actions. And I think this is particularly important to understand for politics focused on ending sexual violence.
Brilliant. And what I love about this is that it links back to several topics that we've dealt with before. So coloniality, in particular capitalism, and then sort of projects forward into subjects that we're going to look at after this week, particularly prisons and the prison industrial complex. So we've got the whole gamut there, which is absolutely excellent.
Yeah.